So there's a new patent floating around the internet that really suggests that the PS5 is pretty much going to have no loading times whatsoever. What does this mean for the PS5? What does this actually mean for consumers and for Sony? Who really knows? Because you do have to realize a lot of companies get these patents. They patent certain things, but they actually don't go through with their patents. They just want to hold these patents to say that they have this technology, but they actually don't use it. But yes, there is this patent floating around from Sony, and the crazy thing about this patent is apparently they've had this patent for many years. They've actually had this patent ever since the 7th generation of consoles. I think back when we were playing the PS3, Xbox 360, and the Wii, they've already got this license or got this patent. And this patent, pretty much the way they word this patent, pretty much indicates that they may be moving towards a no loading time future, pretty much. And that's absolutely nutty and absolutely mind-blowing if they go through with that, and every single game next generation is going to have no loading times. Now take a look at this video. This video is already real proof that we're pretty much almost going to have no loading times. So basically at Sony, they did a comparison between, I think, a PS4, I don't know if it's a Pro, I want to say it's a Pro, and between a PS5, and they did Spider-Man, and Spider-Man is an open world game. And when they did the comparison between the PS4 and the PS4, it was literally night and day. It was 8 seconds for the original PS4 to load into Spider-Man, and then with the PS5, it only took like 8 milliseconds. So that's absolutely nutty. It was under 1 second altogether. So you can see that's not quite 0 seconds, but apparently with this new patent, just the way they're wording it, the way that it sounds and everything like that, it may actually indicate that we are going to be getting 0 loading times in video games. Would I still take the 8 milliseconds? Of course, I would still take the 8 milliseconds even if they don't get 0 loading times. But if somehow they can figure out how to get 0 loading times with the next generation of consoles like the PS5 or the next Xbox, that's absolutely going to be mind-blowing. And that's the problem nowadays with a lot of these video game systems. We still have relatively long loading times. Of course, it will depend on what video game you're playing. Some video games are better optimized and some video games are not better optimized. Honestly, it also does come down to the developer. You do have to realize. So for instance, even if Sony does use this patent and they can actually get games to load at 0 seconds, doesn't mean every developer will utilize that function, because you do have to realize when it comes to performance, when it comes to load time and everything like that, some developers know how to utilize their games and some developers don't know how to utilize their games. That's why with these consoles, sometimes you get different frame rates, different resolutions. You also get different loading times with all these different games, because some developers are much more smarter, much more better. They understand technology, they understand everything that goes behind game development, but then some companies just do not understand game development. So it will really depend on the developer, most likely, when it comes to how the loading times are going to work with the PS4. But just to know that technology exists, and just to know, back to the PS4 versus PS5 Spider-Man loading time, just to know we can get milliseconds of loading time is actually going to be a quality of life improvements for every single gamer. No longer will we have to wait for these long loading times. No longer will we have to sit through these different screens. And a lot of times with a lot of these different games, you do have to realize there's loading times even if you don't know the loading times are there. Like for instance, with some games, they'll trick you by having like you go into like an elevator, and as the elevator is going down, it's actually loading parts of the game. That's pretty much how they trick you. But maybe next generation we won't have to worry about loading times altogether. And apparently with this brand new patent, the way it's actually going to work when it comes to loading times in video games with the next generation of systems, at least with the PS5, apparently the way they're wording it and the way they're talking, it's going to work like this. Basically, as you're actually playing the game, like for instance, let's say you're playing an open world game, and you know in an open world game you can pretty much go wherever you want, and as you're going pretty much wherever you want in an open world game, apparently it's going to be loading most of the game, or not all, or all of the game as you're actually going around the world. And apparently it's supposed to predict where you're going in the world, and as it's predicting where you're going in the world, it's automatically already loading that game. So when you get there, it's already loaded and you won't have to worry about loading times. Honestly, one thing I will say when it comes to loading times, the one place where loading times would be very beneficial, I do believe, is in open world games. If you play an open world game, you guys know the loading times do break the experience, because why would you want to play an open world game? You want to feel like you're in an open world game, but by having loading times pretty much take away from the experience. Even if they're 8 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, whatever the case may be, it's not going to be good for the actual experience. You want want to get immersed with the world, you want to get immersed with the characters, but how can you be immersed when you're going around different parts of these open world games, and then you have to worry about all these different loading times? Loading times should not exist. Now, it doesn't really matter all too much when you're playing other types of games. It's just that it's going to be more beneficial, in my opinion, when we're talking about these big open world games. That's where loading times will really come in effect. It's going to be badass if they can actually figure out how to have no loading times in any single video game. But there it is. It looks like Sony has patented a new patent, and apparently this patent's been around since the 7th generation of consoles, and it's very interesting to see the direction that video games are going, in the direction of loading times, hardware, and things like that. And that really does seem like it's going to be a pretty big improvement from what we have from the 7th generation, the 8th generation, and now I think moving on to the 9th generation of consoles. This is actually going to be some substantial stuff. What I also really want to know is, I really want to know how are current gen games going to work on next generation regarding loading times, because as you guys know, if the PS5 is backwards compatible with PS4 games, does that mean those games will get significantly less loading times, like Spider-Man? Because you know Spider-Man, they did that demo, and that demo was clearly night and day. Same thing with the Xbox One, the next Xbox. If they can get the Xbox One games or the Xbox 360 or original Xbox games to pretty much have no loading times, if they can do something like that, that would absolutely be mind-blowing. And I think it would give a lot of consumers a reason to jump on the next generation bandwagon, because I know a lot of people keep saying, what are they going to add to these next generation of consoles to make them actually viable, to make them feel like they're a leap in technology? Because as technology grows, you can only grow graphics so much, you can only grow frame rate so much, and at the end of the day, it's harder for consumers to justify that jump from this generation to the next generation. It's not like it was back in the day, like for instance moving from the PS2 to the PS3, and then when we started moving to the PS3 to the PS4, or the Xbox 360 to the Xbox One, we really didn't see that much improvements in terms of like fidelity, frame rate, and things like that, and less people were blown away. But I think I think the thing that's really going to blow people away is actually the loading times in games. So if they can figure out the loading times in games, I think this is really going to be a big game changer for everybody in the industry, and I'm very excited to see where they're taking this, because if they can get 0 loading times or millisecond loading times, this is absolutely going to be fantastic. Anyway, guys, this is Wayne from My Tech News, signing out.